All right, here we are, part 2 of the 100 Painting Challenge retrospective. So in part 1, I covered the first 24 paintings that I did. And I use the term paintings loosely because, some of them I'm using drawing implements like watercolor markers or acrylic markers or watercolor pencils. Like, it's not always a painting implement, but for lack of a better word, since it's mixed media and usually involves some sort of painting, we're calling it a painting challenge. All right, so let's dive right back in. This one, painting 25, I believe this one used some sort of inks, I want to say. It's got these like brown marks, and then I drew over them with watercolor marker. I think it was yarn. I think I dipped yarn in ink, and I just like placed it on the paper, and so it created these like swirly lines. And it almost looks like a face now. Like, I guess you can sort of see eyes here, like a very, very abstract face. I think this was one of the more successful ones in terms of like creating an interesting shapes and patterns. So I would definitely try that one again. This one's kind of interesting. I applied modeling paste to leaves and then I stamped them into the paper. It was very messy because modeling paste kind of stuck to the leaves and also stuck to the paper. But you can still kind of see the imprint of the leaves, even though it was kind of messy. So it kind of worked, but definitely would leave a better imprint if you use like a jelly plate or even just put paint directly on the leaves and stamped it. I was just curious what kind of like three-dimensional impression you could leave if you used modeling paste. All right. This one, I drew some flowers with watercolor marker and then I sprayed it with water and smeared it around. So you can still kind of see a little bit of the flower shape in some places. I really like how vibrant some of the colors stayed, like here especially, it's still like really bright pink. And I feel like maybe I added some salt on this one because you can see some places where there's like white marks left over, which usually happens when you put salt in because the salt absorbs the paint and it like leaves white plate spots where the paper still, you can still see the paper underneath. This one was a fun one. This one I used coffee and it left very, very faint impressions. So what I did was I took a coffee filter and a coffee filter with old coffee grinds in it and I just stamped it. And so it leaves this really, really faint mark, but it kind of looks like a rose. And so then I traced the mark with marker. And I think that actually turned out pretty cool, but I was like not happy with how faint, sorry, it's upside down. I wasn't happy with how faint the coffee is, just like such a faint mark. So I also decided to add some swirls and some ink, some darker ink marks so that it like actually looks like a finished piece and not just like some imprints that you can barely see unless you're like 2 inches from the page. Okay, on to the next one. This one is very thick and heavy. It already feels like a much heavier paper than the others. So I worked a lot with different textured mediums, and this feels like it's probably fiber paste. So I have a bunch of different mediums. I don't unfortunately have them at this desk. I have a second desk off to the side where I also paint. But like one I use a lot is this matte medium. This is like a transparent medium, and it's, you know, you can mix it with acrylics, but it's not thick or textured the way this one is. So with this one, I think I mixed the paint and the medium together in this like red color and this brown color, and I like smeared it around. I think I actually might have a process video for this one, so it might be best to go back and look at that. But with the palette knife, it left a lot of interesting marks if you look closely at it, but it's kind of samey from a distance. It just looks like a bunch of smears. But up close, I don't know if it'll focus. Yeah, up close there's some interesting marks that are left over where I like scraped into it a little bit and made some interesting shapes. Okay, get it back in the sleeve. Oops, this one should have been a lot earlier on. I think this was like number 5 or 6 of the paintings I did, but this one was a stencil for eyes. Like I used this like, it looks kind of like an eye, but it's also like geometrical. I put that stencil down and I traced it with oil pastel, like a brown oil pastel. And then I sprayed the paper and added like ink, different shades of ink. Like I have these, this is like a darker brown, and then I have this like yellowish color. I'm almost out of these now. Surprising I still even have them. But so yeah, when you blend them together and put them on wet paper, it like drips, and the oil pastel resists it. So the inks kind of go around the oil pastel. So I wish these like marks on the side weren't there, but aside from that, I think it's kind of a cool one. All right. There were a few I did that are similar to this one. I think I did 3 total, where I mixed a couple different colors of fluid acrylics. And fluid acrylics, they drip and smear around really easily. You can use them almost like inks, pretty much the same as inks. So this one was like black and a few other colors, but you can't really tell because the black just absorbed everything. But I just made like a few quick lines with the fluid acrylics. It has a point like this applicator tip, so you can just sort of apply and like smear it around or move it around. So they all kind of turned out to look a little bit like faces, or like these snake-like patterns that kind of look like faces. So that kind of turned out cool, I think. But this is probably my least favorite just because it doesn't have a lot of color. You can't really see, like there's a tiny bit of white. Like here, you can see that there's, if it'll focus on it, there's a tiny bit of white, but it really mostly got lost. Okay, here's one that I don't think turned out very well at all. I like the green and the blue colors. I also like smeared them with fiber paste, mixing the colors together. But this time I used like slightly transparent acrylics, so you can see more like, you can still see the white under the paint, under the modeling paste. And I used some pastel, like orange pastel pencils. And those, I don't know, I didn't really like how they look. I mean, maybe if I developed it further, the orange, the pastel, I think it just, it doesn't leave very bright marks. It kind of just like blends in too much. So maybe a different way of approaching it could have resulted in something interesting. I mean, orange and blue tend to look good together, but I think might have been losing steam at this part of the challenge. I think if you just look at this corner, the purple and the The purplish green is kind of pretty, the purplish pink. All right, this one was a stencil that I used with modeling paste. So I put the stencil down, I applied the modeling paste, and then I went over some of the shapes with a black pastel pencil. Can't say that I'm really thrilled with how this one turned out. I mean, it certainly retains the stencil really well. So if you're using modeling paste with stencils, you'll get a pretty obvious result. But I mean, I kind of knew that already. I just hadn't used this fiber paste, modeling paste before with a stencil. The paint didn't really get, oh, you know what? Maybe I didn't use paint for this one on top. I think I just used straight modeling paste, and then I went over with pastels because you can kind of see that the inner marks, they're white still. So I don't think I went in all the way with paint. I'm just remembering this since, again, I did this exercise a whole year ago, so. Okay, next one. Yeah, this one was with fluorescent spray paint. Blue fluorescent spray paint. This was a stencil I hadn't used before, kind of like the bicycle pattern or the wheel pattern. And then I actually put the stencil under the paper, and I tried to like use charcoal and see if it would the stencil would show up on top. And as you can see, it didn't. So that didn't work, but it's kind of interesting seeing the charcoal, this very abstracted flat shape with this very defined stencil on top. I think the contrast is kind of interesting. All right, here's one where I kind of did a little bit of everything. I put some collage in, I used some acrylic markers to make these squares. I added a stencil with modeling paste, and this is bubble wrap. If you put paint and then put bubble wrap on top, it leaves let me take it out of this sleeve. It leaves the stamp, the shape of the bubbles is kind of still there. So I mixed a lot of water with the paint, so it's almost like watercolors, but the acrylic marker is more obvious. This one got a little bit messy. I think the farther into this exercise I got, the more my table got just covered in stuff, and it was really hard to keep the paper clean and not get smudged with whatever random supplies and paints were lying around. I think you can see the same with this one. This was also I had this paper from Republic of Tea. I got it a gift package for my birthday, and it had a ton of this wrapping paper with these big leaves. So I thought I'd use a little bit of that and then add more leaves. So I made a leaf with inks. Then I drew some leaves with watercolor. And I think down here I was like, oh, I don't like that the page is ripped. Let me cover it up with some modeling paste. And I just left it white. I thought it would make an interesting transition from the white of the paper. But if I were to do it again, I'd probably just paint that green because it looks a little bit weird to me. And I also wish this ink hadn't smudged like this. This paper is very, very thin. So it's easy for the inks to kind of smudge all over. Got to be careful with inks because they will get everywhere. Okay, this one was also from the beginning. I guess it got mixed up. I used a stencil, these triangle stencils, and these watercolor pencils. They're kind of old. They're actually erasable watercolor pencils, but they're Prismacolor. And I used this brown and green colors and kind of overlapped them. And the paper was still kind of wet, so I was interested if I also dripped inks on top, if the colors would also drip or smudge around. And in some places you can barely see the watercolor pencil because it kind of blends in with the browns. But it's kind of cool in places how it drips straight down and like almost like straight lines. That was the part that I was like going for, was this interesting way that the ink seems to be drawn to the next triangle. And like this part is interesting, I think, where it kind of sticks to the shape. Okay, oh, this one was fun. I had been watching tutorials and I found out that you can use Vaseline to resist paint. So I put a layer of Vaseline on a stencil, this kind of like swirly, I don't have it on me right now. Maybe I'll get the stencils out later, but it had this like swirly kind of like, it looked like kind of like a mosaic tile with these like old-fashioned swirly designs. It was very geometrical. And so I put the Vaseline down first in that pattern, and then I went over it with paint, and then the idea was to like rub off the Vaseline to reveal the pattern again. And if you're going for like a really grungy kind of like smudged look, and you also have really strong hands, because I was rubbing this off for like 20 minutes. It was way beyond the time that I was allocating for each of these. It gets really messy, and the not very much of the stencil remained by the time I was done, because I was rubbing so hard that it, you know, completely lost the trace of the pattern on all three sides, except for here where you can still kind of see the pattern. So it was a very, very messy process. I don't know what was happening down here, if I just got lazy and didn't want to put as much paint down, but I feel like I can still feel some of the Vaseline on the paper that like didn't come off. So definitely, if you're gonna do this process, be ready for some pain and suffering. Oh, this was a fun one. This one, I just took a bunch of pencils in one hand that are different colors, and I tried to draw like a really messy face. So this also reminds me a little bit of Kandinsky, just the like crazy lines and the flourishes. I don't know, it kind of looks like they're smoking a pipe or something. I don't know what's happening here, but it's kind of a fun one. It's very colorful if you look up close. There's like green and yellow and blue. I don't know what would happen if I got this wet, if it would be more interesting or just turn into a mess of colors. All right. You saw the leaf one from before where I used the modeling paste. This is a leaf one where I just painted a leaf and stamped it on, just as a comparison. I feel like I probably didn't either use too much water or didn't like put enough paint on, or didn't stamp it on long enough, because you can't really see that much of the details of the leaf. It's you really just see that middle line and the general shape. So I think this requires a little bit more patience to get a good imprint. All right, moving right along. So I really like working with semi-transparent paper and just layers. I'm obsessed with layers. I'll probably make other videos where I show more of my work, since these are like a bunch of abstract experiments. They don't necessarily reflect my other paintings, but this was one of those experiments where I wanted you to be able to see the poem underneath. I'm kind of obsessed with Emily Dickinson, so I use a lot of her poetry. I have a number of paintings that have her poetry in them. And then I had this clear tissue paper, so I put this matte medium on. Oh, sorry, my paints are falling all over the place. And then I think I put charcoal on here, so there's some pretty interesting patterns if you look closely. Just like this grungy kind of craziness going on. And you can still see the text underneath. I think that's where it's the most interesting, is this area in the middle where you can see the text but also see the paper. Yeah, this kind of thing I love to do. I love to play with the layers. It's actually really helpful going over this again, not just as a, oh yeah, like here's these things that I did just to share with you, but also for me to remember, because it's like, oh yeah, like these were like the ones that were the most fun. These are like things that I want to try again. And why I recommend doing this sort of exercise, because if you're thinking about, like if you're stuck in your practice and you're not really sure where you want to go next, it's a great way of remembering like why you got into art in the first place. Like, what are the types of things you like to do? It's easy to get lost when you're like working on a body of work and you're feeling like, okay, like I've done like 5 paintings, I still have like 10 more to go. And, you know, things get kind of repetitive, and sometimes you just feel like you're stuck or like something's not working anymore. At the end of the day, like if the art's not bringing you joy, if you're not having fun, something's wrong, right? So like this type of exercise lets you just have fun and let loose and just like do whatever. Like it doesn't matter if it's bad, it's fine. Like you're playing. Art is play. And that's something that sometimes I have to remind myself. Okay, so this was with a fork, believe it or not. I just used like iridescent paint and red paint and okay, I'm saying too much, sorry. This is like the blending, I think, is where it's the most interesting, where the iridescent paint blends with the reds. And just the patterns, I guess, like up here where they like blend and turn into like a grid. Like the areas where it turns into a grid are the most interesting. Down here it's a little weird that it just like suddenly goes this way and there's not as much paint. And here I wish I hadn't smudged it like that, but yeah, who knew? Painting with a fork is actually kind of fun and leaves in some interesting patterns. This was one of the lazy ones I did. I mean, to be fair, a lot of them took longer than they were supposed to, so of course there are going to be some where I took like 2 seconds. I made these like stamps out of cardboard. I literally just like taped some pieces of cardboard together, and I was curious like what kind of impression it would leave if you just put paint on the cardboard and stamped it on the page. And funnily enough, it doesn't leave a very flat mark. It actually leaves some pretty interesting marks. So each one kind of looks different. Like, I don't know if I think I used a different stamp here than the one here and here, but the one here and the one here is the same, but you can see the mark is very different. And it leaves like some interesting white space. Okay, here's another one of the face ones, or, well, they sort of look like faces or snakes or some circular thing. This one turned out a lot better, I think, than the one that was black and white, because the black just took over. This one was like orange, brown, and white, I believe. Protectors kind of get in the way sometimes, but let's see if it'll focus on that. It kind of looks like almost volcanic. And I think some of the drips here even are kind of interesting. A little too many down at the bottom, but it's quite a thick amount of paint. I had to leave these to dry for a while and just not touch them, because I knew if I did, it would drip everywhere. Okay, here's another one with the layering. another Emily Dickinson poem. And this time it was the same paper with the leaf on it, but this one I painted on top of it with this like iridescent paint. So you can still see the poetry. You can still read it. And I think that I always like when you can still read it, because that's like the interesting aspect of the layering, is like the text is there, but also these like interesting colors and interesting iridescence when you move it different ways. Of course, this is kind of messy on the sides. Like you could probably just like mat it to the middle, or even I would maybe cut it and just make like a small one out of it, like 8 by 8 maybe or something, so you don't even see this part. But even the parts where like you can see the paper kind of folded in on itself, because it's so thin, it's really hard to glue it flat. Even that, I think, adds some interesting dimensionality to it. So I don't know if that necessarily bothers me, but the iridescence is pretty cool. I think that's the coolest part. All right. I promised myself I wouldn't make these videos longer than 30 minutes, because God knows we all have places to be and we don't watch 30-minute videos that much, so, or certainly not more than 30. This was, I think, actually one of the very first ones I did. So and there's a process video for this one. It's like, I think it's like painting challenge number 1. I put some tape down on each side, and then I put a layer of paint. So it's like looks the edges are very crisp. And then I made these like crazy ink marks. I wish I didn't put quite so many, because I think it got a little bit too messy. And some places the crisp line, I think maybe I needed to use a better kind of tape, like better masking tape, because I don't like how it got like kind of messy, a little blurry on the edges. And then I think I added these like white dots with white ink. I wish I hadn't done that either, because it just takes away. And I think I even added, yeah, it looks like I added some charcoal too. So I guess I went a little crazy with this one. I don't know if it looks better this way or this way. I think there's something there, like if I did it again, I could do something a little bit more interesting. Okay. 27 minutes. God, there's still so many more of these to go. There, I'm gonna have 4 parts. I was hoping I could do this in 3 parts. So here's another one where I stamped pieces of cardboard with paint on them. But this time, this one had some like pinkish iridescence with the green paint, and this one just had the green paint. I don't know, again, which way. That's the fun thing about abstracts, is you can like turn them any which way. I honestly still think I like it this way the most. But when you look up close, that's when it's the most interesting. Whoa, okay, I turned on some fancy feature, AF tracking lock. Okay, I don't know what that is. I'm gonna find out. All right. I had a friend who really liked this one. It's more grungy, I guess you could say, or I don't know, grungy punk, something like that, where I just like splattered a bunch of black paint, and then I sort of saw the patterns or looked for images inside of them. So this one's like an owl smoking a pipe, like a skull, some fish. I don't really know what's going on down here. Don't even ask me, but I'm still pretty, I like this owl. I think this owl's pretty great. So yeah, this one I think turned out pretty good. Okay, I think I have time for one more. Goodness, this has, what did I do here? Oh wow, there's like a whole bunch in this sleeve. Oh my goodness, so many. Oh gosh. Okay, well, we're not gonna cover all of those, but I think this is the last of the faces. It still kind of looks black, but if you look closely, it's got other colors in it. It's got like red and blue, and this one is the one that looks most like a face to me. It's kind of a freaky face, freaky mouth with a weird hole in his cheek. but it's like the most interesting pattern to me. Like, it's really interesting how it like spirals up here. So I don't know, this looks like a little hand, like he's like saying like feed me or something. I don't know, but I think it's a fun one. I think this one turned out pretty good. All right, well, at the 30-minute mark, as promised, I'm gonna wrap this one up, but stay tuned for part 3. And God, I don't know how many more of these there are. I guess there's at least another 20. I think I mentioned in the first video, I threw away some of them, so there aren't 100 total that are left, but there's still quite a few, so it might be as many as 70. I guess I last time I counted these, so let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25. Oh wow, so almost the same number I covered in the last one. Seems like I go through about 24, 25 in 30 minutes, so if I have close to 100, I guess that means there will probably be 4 parts. Cool. Well, if you've watched this far, thanks for watching. If you want to see more content like this, please subscribe. I'm, still a new channel, so just here to share my process and my art and just be real, Okay, bye.